Hey, I'm Scott at ediblemusic.com. You might have been working on your song for a while, and the mix is beginning to sound great, or you think it does, but you're also unsure about how to evaluate and what to check for in order to be assured that the mix is ready to be moved into the mastering stage. So I want to help you out with that today by giving you some clear steps to finalize your mix before you bounce it out for mastering. This is actually a pretty common trouble that a lot of home studio musicians have when I work with them. So what I did is I'm going to boil all of this down into a checklist as well that you can download and use at the end of every mixing process that you've got, mixing project. You can get it at ediblemusic.com/ready. What it breaks down to is you're going to listen to it 3 times. On the first listen, you want to play it at a relatively high volume so that you can make sure that none of the sounds or instruments in the song are sticking out from the mix or are sounding kind of unpleasant in comparison with the rest of the mix balance. And as you're listening, check for the difference between the peak level and the RMS level. And on your master channel in your workstation, the peak level will be the very highest that the green meter shows. And then the RMS will be usually a more solid green. So there will be a bit of space between the highest point and the more average point. And you want that to be around 5 to 10 decibels or so. Also, as you're listening, check for the level of the lead vocal, or if it's an instrumental track, the lead instrument that you might have going on in there. It should be as loud throughout the track. So it should be as loud at the beginning, even if it's sung more quietly compared to, say, the final chorus. In level wise, it should be around the same amount. And it also shouldn't stray too far from the rest of the instruments. The vocals should feel coherent with the rest of the instruments that are in the track. Similarly, give your focus to the mid-range for the same kind of issue. If there's an instrument that seems to stand out from the track too much and maybe overpowers the other parts of the track, then you'll want to go back and adjust that as well. Also on this first listen, you want to compare the LUFS reading and the RMS reading. And if they're too far apart, then you'll want to check on your low end. If they're not far apart at all, then you also might want to check your low end for the opposite reason. But if they're too far apart, then your low end might not be strong enough. So you might need to boost it up a bit, whether that's by raising the volume of your bass guitar or your kick drum, or maybe a keyboard instrument that would reach all the way down to those low frequencies. But if there is too great of a difference, then you'll want to go back and check that. If some of these are issues that you hear coming up or that you see coming up on the meters that you're reading, then you want to make sure that you fix those before you move on to the second listen. And in the second listen through is where you'll check your song against your reference tracks. And when you do so, to set it up, turn down the reference track a bit so that it is pretty closely leveled out with the volume of your mix, because your song isn't mastered yet, so it won't really be quite as loud as the mastered track. So just pull the mastered tracks volume down so that they're about even. And as you compare, you might find that your mix isn't as bright or doesn't have as much high-end frequencies as the reference track does. But that's okay, because that is a process that is the result of mastering. So you don't have to worry about that too much. If it's an enormous difference, then you might have chosen potentially an inaccurate reference track to the goals of your mix, or you might just need to go ahead and again go back to your mix and make a few corrections in order to bring up the brightness just a little bit. But if there is a discrepancy that you hear between the top end of the reference track and of your mix, don't get too hung up on that yet. Also on this second listen through, compare between the reference track and your mix the crest factor of the low end on both tracks. Read out how it looks on the reference track, and crest factor means the difference between the highest level and the average level. It should be around 12 or 15, but if it's much lower than that, say anywhere lower than 8, then it's going to cause some problems. And what you're checking for in the crest factor is the difference between the highest level and the average level. And what you're checking for here is to make sure that the low end isn't overpowering the track, nor is it underpowering the track. If there's too great of a difference in the crest factor, then most of the more transient information, the brighter information in the track, are going to be louder than the low end. Whereas if there's not enough of a difference, then the low end will be kind of overpowering the track and will be masking and muddling up all of those nice, useful, percussive kind of transient information that will help the energy of the mix. So if you want to find a sweet spot, then look for it at around 12 dB to 15 dB. It can go a little bit outside of that area, but not too far. If it's too low, then your low end will need probably to be brought down or tightened up somehow. Or if it's not enough, then it means that your low end will need to be brought up in order to interact more closely with the transient information. Now, each of these steps are really important. That's why I made this checklist for you. It's at ediblemusic.com/ready. After you've gone through these first 2 listens and you've checked them all off and made sure that each of them are in the right areas, then your third listen through will be a final check to make sure that there are no technical issues that are remaining. After these 3 listens and making sure that all of the boxes are checked, then your mix is ready for mastering.